Hi guys, and welcome to today's tutorial. Today I'm going to paint this eye with watercolor and color pencils. I'm going to start with a base color for the skin tone. And I'm using a large brush for this. This is a calligraphy brush or a scribble brush. They have different names. And it is very useful because I can both fill out large areas, but I can also get very detailed with the very fine tip. And for the base skin tone, I'm using Venetian red, yellow ochre, and a bit of Van Dyke brown. So with watercolors, we have to preserve the brightness of the paper. We don't want to be too dark because it can't be reversed. It is very difficult. So I start with a very light base. Also, the skin has dark, warm areas, and the light areas are kind of cold from the skin tone. Like the skin tone is kind of bluish and it has a cold feel to it. So we have a nice contrast here. So the tone that I mixed is a bit too brown, so I will, in order to get this warmth, I will just add a bit of the cadmium orange light. This is a very bright orange. And you see, this makes it a bit more orangey. And I just fill the entire area here with this very light orange skin tone. There are some spots of my reference photo where we have highlights and they are almost white. So I will leave them out when I fill this area here, because then it is even brighter as a highlight. Especially like this area here, it is almost white. I use a bit more water even to make this skin tone even lighter. I just go around the edges here to blend it a bit in the surrounding. Okay, now I will add some shadows in the wet areas. And I'm using red, a bit red and a bit Venetian red. Venetian red is almost like burnt sienna. I don't have burnt sienna. I thought the paint that I buy was burnt sienna, but it was Venetian red. It is very similar. If you have watercolors that are not exactly the same tone that I use, don't worry about it. It is not necessary. Like, they are so many different tones. As long as the pigmentation is good and the tone is like similar to a tone that I use or that other artists use in their tutorial, it's fine. So here I go in this wet color, and the paint bleeds into the surrounding, and this gives us a nice gradient. And I will just use more of this color that I mixed with a bit less water. And I just fill out the areas that on the reference photo that are a bit darker. And this area here is dried again, so I just have to fill it out with water again so that the color can bleed into it. Now I will use a bit more of the Van Dyke brown, which is a dark brown, for the darker areas. It will, of course, still not be dark enough. Although it already looks dark, as soon as watercolor dries, it will completely fade and be very, very light. So when you want to build up values and want to make shadows, You have to go over areas a lot of times, or you can also be bold and use a dark color right away. But oftentimes I'm not that bold, so I use several layers and just carefully get to the final values. And here for the eyebrow, it's super important to make a base color and not in the end just paste some individual hairs and then expecting that there's suddenly an eyebrow, because every eyebrow hair has a shadow underneath it. So when you would just add just individual hair strands on the skin, it would look super unnatural and not realistic. So we have to make a base color here for the eyebrow. Here over the eyebrow, it needs to be a bit lighter. So I just use my wet brush and I go over this area and it lifts off the paint. So now we have a light area here again. It also lifts off a bit of the darker area, so we have to wait until this is dried. Here for the inside of the eye, of course there are shadows. When the paper is very wet, the color bleeds very strongly. So when I wait a bit, I can, my paint will have a better effect. So I will just go here in this area. Like this area here, it's dried a little bit more than the upper area. So when I add watercolor, it doesn't bleed as strongly. It is just a tiny difference. But I can kind of control how much I want my color to bleed when I know how wet an area is. It is a bit difficult, but you will definitely get a feeling for it when you paint with watercolors. So here in the corner of the eye, we have a lot of reds. And there are also some highlights, some little highlights. So with the tip of the brush, I only touch the paper and I leave some spots open so that it looks like highlights. Now I want to have this gradient here, so I will just use a different brush this time, a wet brush again. And when I follow this line here, I have a gradient already, so this is very useful. And here the waterline of the eye, I want to have a bit smoother, so I will also just apply a bit of pressure here and go over this area, so it takes off some of the paint again. Okay, I will now try to work on this area here. I use Van Dyke Brown, Venetian Red again. And a bit of indigo blue. So this gives the paint a cool variant, like a cool tone to it. So I'm not sure how strong it will look, so I will start with the darkest area here. So this is very strong, so this is a bit too much, so I will just use more water. And it's also not red enough, so I will also use a bit of the red tone that I have, use a bit more water, and then I go over this area. This looks like I want it. So you can also use a scrap piece of paper in order to get the right colors. I never used this because, I don't know, I've never used it even when I started watercolors. I only use it when I do illustrations and I don't have a reference photo, because then I have to test out which colors look good. But you can decide for yourself, like how you like it the best. So here I just want to have this area a bit darker. It's very wet now. So I will just let it dry, or I can also use a hairdryer, and then I will continue with the rest. Maybe I can still make a shadow here on the right side of the eye. I will use a bit of indigo blue into my more reddish skin tones, because the shadow here is more gray than on the left side. And in order to get it more gray, I just mix more indigo blue in the skin tones. Like that. I will just draw the shadow here around the bone of the eyebrow, because there's some shadow as well. And now there's a lot of yellow in the skin tone as well, so for that I'm using yellow ochre, but just really light, so I'm using a lot of water, and then I'm just touching like some areas of this eye with the color. Skin colors are always very patchy and they are never even in real life. So in order to get it realistic and not like a magazine cover photo, the more different patchy spots you add on your skin tone, the more natural it looks. So I can also use just greens and blues if I wanted. It still wouldn't look wrong, because skin is very colorful in real life. So here, this color already faded, but on the reference photo it is very bright. So I will just add more of it. Cadmium orange light and a red tone. I don't know how my red tone is called. It's probably cadmium red as well. I do have, like, started out with pens and now I've switched to tubes. And on the tubes I can always see what color I use, but with the pens I don't know anymore because the description is gone. This is a great color, so it's probably cadmium red and cadmium orange, and it's very bright. So cadmium tones have great pigments, and I can recommend them. But not cadmium mix. I don't know what this is, but cadmium mix doesn't have good pigments. Just cadmium red light, cadmium red dark, or also cadmium orange. Like, I can recommend these pigments. Now everything is dried, but you can see how light the watercolors got. Like, it was very dark when it's still wet, but now it's very light. So we'll have to add another or a couple of other layers to make it dark enough. But I will first continue with the inside of the eye. And for that I'm just mixing the browns that I had here on my palette, and I'm adding just a ton of water to it to make them very light. And also the inside of the eye has a slight greenish bluish tone to it. It's not completely gray. So I will just use a bit of olive green and a bit of ultramarine blue. Just a tiny bit. And I add some of the grayish tone. And now we should have a good white of the eye. So it's never really white. And I now just fill in the space of the around the iris. And here at the right corner there is a highlight, so I will leave a tiny spot open, a tiny spot of white, and I just draw this white color until the edge, and also on the left side. But then we have a gradient in the white of the eye, so it's kind of skin tone-ish orange. So I will just use some of the color that I have mixed on my palette on the tip of the brush, and I just touch this white. So the paint will bleed a bit into this white. And here on the top, I just use a dark brownish blue tone. Just some of the paint that I just mixed and that is dried already on my palette. I can just use the same color. And I still try to leave this little spot here open. And I fill out the edge of the eye. Here I will also add a bit of this darker tone. And to make a clear line, I just draw a line here over the iris around the eye. Here as well, directly above of the waterline, we have a very thin shadow line. So, which is kind of skin tone and brown. So I just use the same paint, the same color, just mix them together a bit. This was not enough water, it's a bit dark, so I'm also using a smaller brush now. But with more water. And I will follow this line here. This is a new brush, Da Vinci. The size is 1, and I bought it because my cheap watercolor brushes were okay, but sometimes they're a bit wobbly. And for the very fine details, I thought it is a good investment to finally buy a real watercolor brush. But the cheap ones are okay too. So for the inside, the corner of the eye, we do have shadows there too. They are a bit more orange, so orange brown. So I'm using Venetian red and the cadmium orange. And I just make the line here in the edge of the corner of the eye. So we need a bit more red here. And I'm just rendering what I see on my reference picture. We have a shadow around this corner here, and I'm just mimicking that. Now the brush is already too small, so I'm switching back to another one. We still need a lot of shadows here, but I think at first I will make the inside of the eye. So I use Van Dyke brown because we have the eye color is brown. I will go over the pupil as well. As long as I can see my drawing beneath it, it's okay. I just want to have an even coat of paint here. And here for the edges of the iris, I do the same effect that I used for the edges of the white of the eye. So for the edge, I use Van Dyke brown and a bit of the Venetian red, which gives me a warm brown tone. Now I'm just touching the corners of the iris. So the top of the iris is very dark because there's a shadow from the eyelid that falls on the iris. So we need to get very dark there. For that I'm just using ivory black, and because the paint is wet, it will still bleed into the iris, which is exactly what we want. So it didn't bleed enough though, so I will just make the tip of my brush a bit wet, or just a wet brush, and then I just follow the edge of the black here and draw it down into the iris, so that we have a nice gradient here from the black shadow on the top of the iris down to the bottom of the iris. So now it looks like a three-dimensional object, and it looks almost realistic. So the inside, the pupil, still needs to be dark. I will just use black and Van Dyke brown so that I get a very dark brown. And I fill out the form of the pupil. I also want the pupil to slightly bleed into the surrounding brown of the iris, because it looks like that on the reference photo as well. It doesn't have a sharp edge. Instead, it has a slightly blurry edge here. So I will just mimic that. I will also draw another line of this dark brown tone around the iris, because it faded, the one that we just did, because the watercolor is always loses its color when it's dried. So this white we will also have to change, but not now. Now everything has to dry first. So I like it already. I need a shadow here, so I will use this indigo blue brown mix that I have on the palette, and I'm just drawing a shadow here around the corner of the eye, drawing it here along the eye. I always do that when I have one color on my brush, that I apply it everywhere on the canvas or on the paper where I see that it belongs. So now I just use a larger brush and make this color fade out a bit. Okay, I will now tackle this area here, and I will use Venetian red, a bit of Van Dyke brown, more Venetian red, because we need a warm brown tone here, almost red. Yeah, but not so saturated. So I'm using a bit of indigo blue to mute it down a bit. I think magenta as well is good. Yeah, magenta. I'm adding magenta. This looks like a good color to me now. Sometimes mixing takes a lot of time. Just trying out different tones. This is good. This almost looks like Caput Mortuum, which is one of the polychromos colors that I use for skin tones. Okay, I'm using more water here. So we have the shadow. The shadow follows the space underneath the eyebrow. Also the borders are smooth, so I just use a wet brush and go along the borders and the edges so that we get a gradient. Also we have a lot of orange there, so I will use the cadmium orange and a bit of red so that we have more of a red-orange tone to mimic the color of the reference photo. just touching here my wet area, and the orange bleeds into it. Here as well, our orange from the start, it faded and it lost its vibrancy, so just add more orange on this space. We have a bit of orange here too, like directly over the lid. In fact, the whole area here has an orange border, like the shadow has an orange border. So I will add this too. Yes, well, we have orange. So now I want to have a gradient. So I will just clean the brush and apply pressure and go along the edges. So now we have kind of a blending here. I never get perfect blendings with watercolors, but I also don't want them. I like when there's a bit of abstraction everywhere. Because why painting with watercolors if you don't like the effects, right? Okay, now this area here needs to be very dark, like the fold over the eyelid. For that I'm using indigo blue and just a bit of Van Dyke brown, and only with the tip I draw this line here. Oh, and you see it bleeds a bit into the surrounding area, but this is okay because this area needs to be dark anyway, so it doesn't matter. So like that. Now I'm adding more olive green here. This area here is too light. The whole area needs to be dark. I also correct the edge here a bit. Here, now I will have to let this dry before I can continue. Just making here a bit of a blending. Okay, now the lower part of the eye, the lower lid, needs a shadow. I just follow what I see on the reference. So here we have this greenish dark shadow. I use a lot of olive green for my green tones, for the natural green tones, which is very, very helpful. Now the color changes, it gets more orange. So I will use the cadmium red tone and the cadmium orange tone. We also have blues here, but I will start with the orange. So I will just draw a line here directly under the waterline of the eye, like that. And then here I will just use more brown and less orange. And then we have here some like wrinkles, and yeah, I will just draw another shadow line here, like that. So here this area needs a shadow too. But first I will use this other brush, and it's just wet, and I will follow this line here, just blend it a bit. And here the inside that I left open, because it is a bit lighter, there's like light that hits the front of the eyelid. Just go over it and make this gradient, this blending. Here as well the line is a bit too harsh, so I want to have a blending here too. So what I do is just draw the same brush over the line. Now it's a bit less harsh. This is good. Yeah. Now here we have another shadow. So I used a bit of the orange tone and the Van Dyke gray tone. Now I have a lot of color on my palette, and I can just pick from it. I don't have to mix everything new, which is very helpful. So Here this area is a bit complicated because there are a lot of different shadows going on. So I will first draw out the shape of the shadows here, like that. And yeah, now I need light ochre, and just add it here. Skin tones are mostly a variation of yellows, greens, oranges and browns. And for yellows I most of the time use the ochre, and for greens the olive greens, for brown burnt sienna or Venetian red, and also for oranges like all the cadmium tones. Yeah, here I will add a bit of the orange. Okay, now I want to blend it. I want to blend the colors that I just added. The shadow over the upper eyelid has dried now, so I could continue here. Also everything else is dried and I can really work on every part now. So what I want to do is to further darken the white of the eye, and I also will change the highlight there, because the highlight isn't really white. It has a slight blue tone to it. So I will just use water and a little tiny drop of ultramarine blue, and then I'm filling the inside of this highlight here. A little bit more blue because one can't really see it. So like that. And the white of the eye definitely needs to be a bit darker. And the good thing is with watercolors that I can still use the color on my palette. I use just a glass palette from a picture frame, and the paint dries on the top, and then if I want to reactivate it I can just use water, and yeah, I can use the same paint again. This is one reason why I love watercolor so much, because I can just stop, come back again whenever I have time, and then continue with the painting. This is so perfect. So I darkened the inside a bit, so still we need to have a shadow here. I will use indigo blue, and only a bit of water, not too much. And I just draw the line here from the lash down to the right corner of the eye. So here the shadow definitely needs to be darker. Also there's a line over the eyelid. So for this line I just use Van Dyke Brown and a bit magenta. So for the line I use purple, Venetian red and magenta and indigo blue. And I just draw this shadow line here, just on top of the eyelid. And here the shadow kind of blends a bit in this area. And now to blur out the edges, I just use the same technique that I use with the other edges. Just a wet brush. I have to be fast though. You see that the edge is almost dried in the paper, so it's a bit too wet. So I'm just using more of the paint so that it can bleed into this entire area. Here for the border, we need a bit green-blue, so I use olive green and indigo blue and water, and I just make this area here bigger, the shadow. Then for the blending again, I'm using a wet brush and blend it out like that. It's pretty easy once you get the once you understand the technique. So here for the inside, for this corner, we need a similar shadow. So again, I'm using Van Dyke Brown and Venetian Red to get a warm brown tone. And I just make this, just follow the shadow in the corner of the eye. It also touches the shadow that we just created, so I can just go over the other shadow. Then just draw the shadow a bit into the eyebrow, but not too much. Here down this area. Then I have to be fast and use a wet brush and go along the edges so that it doesn't dry and we get those harsh edges. We want to have smooth edges. Here for the eyebrow, the base color of the eyebrow is this orange tone. I added it in the beginning, but once it's dried, it's faded. So I will just have to use more orange here. And hopefully this time it will get more visible than the first time. Here again, I would like to have smooth edges, so I use the wet brush and follow the shape of the eyebrow. So it looks really good already. Now I will just build up more of the shadows to make it even more realistic. Here in the inside of the eyelid, again we need more of the orange tone. So I will just add that here. And we can use more of the orange here in the corner at the bottom lid of the eye. And I will also add some stripes here, some orange hair strands in the eyebrow. Also here is a bit of orange, but I will use more water because I don't want it to be too strong. So this looks very good. So I can blend every edge that I want, but sometimes I don't want to have everything blended. I want to have it a bit, I want some of the abstractions there, so I think I just let it like that. Here, this whole eyelid needs to be darker as well, so this is not dark enough. And for the shadow tone, I mix indigo blue again, olive green and Van Dyke Brown. You see that I pretty much used the same colors for the whole skin tone, so you don't need so many colors. When you paint something natural, like skin tone or maybe a landscape or animal fur, for example, they all share this almost the same paint, the same colors all the time. Blue, greens, browns, ochres, it's like earth tones. Like only when you start to paint, for example, flowers or like artificial things, clothing, fashion, or maybe buildings with neon lighting, you will need different colors. But for everything natural, some basic earth tones oftentimes are everything you need. Okay, now I darkened the right corner of the eye. Here, like when you paint lashes or any kind of hair, you need to think that there's always a shadow under every hair, and a bunch of hair creates a lot of shadow. So there's never just a hair and nothing else. So before I paint any kind of hair like lashes or eyebrows, I make sure that underneath I have painted all the shadows before, because once you've added some hair strands with watercolors or lashes and you want to add shadows, the lashes or the hair, the dark color that you add on the paper will be reactivated again and it will smudge. And yeah, we don't want that. So always paint the shadows, always paint the like the ground, the base, before you add dark details on it. Here, the waterline has a shadow as well. Most of the time the eyes is lit in the middle and everything around it is like a ball and it gets darker. So I will just add the shadow here. And a bit of orange, because we don't want it to be too gray. There are always blood vessels everywhere beneath the skin, and this is why it's red and orange. So we need to mimic that and render that in our painting as well. Okay, now this area here, which is very right, on the reference, it is kind of blue. The highlights on the reference have a cool feeling to it. So what I do is I will use a very light ultramarine color. So basically water with a tiny drop of ultramarine blue. And then I just go over this area here. And it tints the skin tone a bit and make it blue. And this looks very natural. Whenever there's bone beneath the skin looks a bit blue. And directly under the eye, you have the, how's it called, cheekbone or what? So it will definitely look blue there. And since I don't want the blue just on one part of the drawing, I will just add some spots of blue here and there on the drawing as well, or on the painting. Now it's painting. Once we use color pencil, it will become a drawing or something in between, I guess. I really like how it looks already. So, okay, what can we do? So here's in the highlight, we have a tiny dark spot. It's not necessary, but when we want to go for a realistic look, we can add that. So also it's not a perfect circle. It's more like half a circle. Maybe like that. Also the pupil needs to be way darker. So I just use the same color and fill out the pupil again. And now I can start working on the lash line. So I will first just make this one line here around the eye, and I will wait for the individual lashes, but the one line here we can do already. The color values are still not dark enough, so although it looks not bad, when I compare it with my reference, I can still see that this area here needs to be darker, and this as well. So I will do it with color pencils, I think. Maybe I will do both. So I will first I will use this slightly larger brush, and I will use purple and Van Dyke brown and a bit of the Venetian red. The Venetian red is very pigmented, so I always take too much of it, and it's very opaque, so I need to be more careful with it. Okay, this area needs to be so much more darker. When you layer watercolor on top of each other, the darker it gets, the more color, the easier the color gets lifted up. So I have to be careful to not use too much water when I build up the layers, because then I lift up the layers beneath and then it gets light again, but I want it to be darker. So it gets a bit trickier the more layers you use. And when this is dried, it will get a bit lighter again. So we will definitely have to use color pencils to get the correct shade of brown here and also the correct color value. So I'm also blending it because I definitely don't want any hard edges here. And here I will also add some of the paint of this color. And here in the corner we have the shadow of the lashes that I still haven't painted yet. So before I can add any lashes, I will have to get the shadow of them first painted. Also just want to correct the shape, the form of the eyelid here. Just blend it a bit like that. Looks very good already, I'm happy with it. So here I will add a bit olive green. I will just touch the wet area with some olive green on my brush. And here this area is like too brown, so I will just add some of the olive green here too. Just makes it a bit more lively. And here under the eye too. So now when I compare my image to the reference, I still see a lot of things that I need to change. This here is too white, and the white of the eye still not dark enough. And here we need a shadow, so I will start with this shadow. Just use orange, and I will correct the shape here of the lower eyelid. So this looked a bit weird, and I will just correct the shape here. If you happen to use a camera to record your drawings, it is extremely useful because when you look at the camera, you can see your painting from distance, and you can immediately see what color values are wrong. So I can recommend that even if you don't want to share the video material, just for you, just for practice. You can also just go away from your canvas or use a mirror, like the usual things that I suggest in some of my videos. Okay, here we need a shadow, an orange shadow, just to work and build up the shape of this eye. Also, like, this one needs to be darker though, like the whole upper lid. We want to have a gradient or a blending between the light of the highlight of the upper lid and the shadow. So I will use the tip of my brush and just go along this dark area here. Then I clean the brush again, and then I just go along this line that I just added here. Now we have a nice gradient. Still, the two areas here, left and right, need to be a bit darker. The left area is more orange than the right area. So I will just add a brown orange tone here. Not too much, just a bit. Blend it in with a wet brush. Here on the right side, the shadow is a bit purple and green, so purple and green at the same time. So I will use my purple, just add purple to all the skin tones that I have on my palette, just mix it in, and a bit of olive green. Then I go over this area here, like that. And then I use the brush again, the wet brush, and I go along the edges. Now we have a nice gradient here. Like you see, you can use this blending technique for every part of your painting. It's super useful. Okay, so everything around the inside of the eye, except for hair, is good. Now I will concentrate on this area here. So the lash line here and the lid, they need to blend into each other as well. There are no hard edges on my reference photo whatsoever, so I will just mimic what I see. I just closely observe and then I render it on my reference. Again, a wet brush, and then just go along the lash line here. And so this is still not three-dimensional enough, so we just need to add more shadows. So I will use this slightly smaller brush and I will make shadows here around the eyeball. I just use a random skin tone that I have on my palette, brown grayish. And here at the corner we have a line, so I don't want to miss this. And then I just add this shadow. Here I add another shadow, just a brown shadow. And here, directly above of this waterline, we need more shadows as well. There is a highlight here, so I leave this highlight out. And then the shadow gets more blue, so I will just add some ultramarine that I have on my palette with a lot of water. And I follow along the shadow line. Now I obviously want to have a gradient. This is way too strong, so I use the wet brush and carefully follow this shadow here. And on the right side, the same. Now we have it blended into the white. So here on the top we need a tiny bit more shadow, so I will just use ultramarine blue and a bit of Van Dyke. Just touch here, this area, just carefully, like that. And the shadow gets blended in. Here I want to add a bit more shadow too, and then with a wet brush I will smooth this shadow and blend it into the white of the eye. Okay, now for the bottom lid here. So, whoops. Here it is not as white, so I will have to make it a bit darker. I will just use the brown orange tone. And I just go over this lighter area here. And then I will use my very tiny brush and I will draw a very thin line directly above, over the waterline, so that we have a distinction between the waterline and the eyeball. And obviously I could never kind of come up with all these details from my memory, so for most of my drawings, or pretty much all of them, I use reference photos. Okay, so I will just make this waterline a bit lighter, just go over it with the wet brush. And with the other brush, I mix a bit more orange. And I will try to make the waterline, the bottom part of the waterline, a bit more accurate. So I use orange and red and just follow this line again. It makes it a bit more blurry as well and not so harsh. This looks not bad. Okay, I will now continue here with the inside of the eye. I need a bit of Van Dyke brown and a tiny bit of Venetian red and a tiny bit of cadmium red. And then here is like, I don't know how this part is called, but here we have some dark areas that I haven't painted yet. So some of them are a bit too dark, so I will use the other brush, which is a bit larger and wet. Just go over the areas, lift some of the paint up again. Okay, and now I will first make the eyebrows. Hopefully in the meantime this part is dry and I can add the lashes and other stuff. Okay, so for the eyebrows I use Van Dyke brown and a tiny bit of the Venetian red. I will first start with, so I think this brush is too large. This doesn't work, so use a smaller brush here. I only carefully touch the surface of the paper with the tip of the brush. I want to have natural eyebrows, so I don't make them all in one direction. And I pretty much just look at my reference photo and I try to figure out in which direction the eyebrows go. So some go from bottom to the top, some go from the top to the bottom, some are longer, and some hairs are smaller, and the strongest and longest hairs are at the beginning of the eyebrow. And also they seem to connect at the top, so they start at different places and then the hair connect to one tip somewhere above the eyebrow. They make little triangles. This is what lashes do as well. If you use this little trick, you can get pretty realistic lashes and eyebrows as well. I also use different colors, so now I added a bit indigo blue into my color, so that they don't have like one color the whole eyebrow. Now I have put down a base already with hair, I have to be a bit more careful and observe where I need more hair, because it is super easy to mess this part up and to make it look unnatural and maybe too strong. There are just too many hairs or hair. Okay, now I will need the smaller brush. I want to add some smaller hair around the bulk of the eyebrow, and also I want them to be lighter, so I just mix more water into my mix. And with a small brush, it is a bit like the impact is not as strong. This is what I wanted. So we have some hair that goes from the top of the eyebrow into the center of it. Normally, I don't pay so much attention to my paintings because an eyebrow isn't such an important part of the painting. But for this tutorial, obviously, I give 100% for you so that you can see how I would do it if I want a perfectly realistic outcome. But it is not required. If you do a painting, it doesn't have to be super realistic. You just have to like your own painting. So don't fret out if you don't get it right. You personally just have to like it. So this area here looks a bit messy, so I will use a bit stronger paint here, a bit Van Dyke brown and a bit purple, just a tiny bit. And I will add some center eyebrows here, like in the center of the bulb of the hair of the eyebrow gets a bit darker, so I will just add some more hair here. This looks pretty convincing, so I think this part is okay. Here we have some stray hair that falls out of the line, so I will just add some of them here. Again, I need to be careful. The one hair is a bit too dark here, so this is not so easy. Yeah, I think I might make this part here a bit lighter and use a wet brush. I can't completely lift off the paint, but I can make it a bit lighter. I think this looks good. Okay. Now I will use the same technique for the lashes. Obviously, this is super stressful because you can easily mess your painting up with some brush strokes. For the lashes, I mix purple and Van Dyke brown. They seem to be a bit purple. They seem to look a bit purpley to me. Also use indigo blue, a bit more purple, and a bit more Van Dyke brown. I might start with a very tiny brush first and more water, so that I can make light lines in the beginning, and then I can maybe make them darker when I think that they look good. So I start here on the right. We have a lot of different directions in which the lashes go. So the majority here goes to the right side, but they are not very even, so each lash is a bit different from the next one. So I just pay close attention to my reference and don't just paint because I think the lashes go in this direction. So they go here from the lash line over the shadow line of the lid that I previously painted. Then we have a lot of lashes at the beginning, and then at the tip they connect to each other. Here as well we have a bunch of lashes, like 5 or 6 of them. Then they come together, and then at the tip they connect. And then here in the middle they kind of change direction. So on the right side they were primarily going to the right, but here in the middle they are almost straight. Directly over the pupil the lashes slowly go in the other direction, but they are still tilted a tiny bit to the right. Normally you don't have to pay such close attention to lashes. Sometimes with some paintings I don't even paint lashes at all, especially when I paint an oil painting and the face is very tiny. I just indicate the lash line with one brush stroke. This is all. So here the lashes go in the opposite direction. So we almost made the whole upper lash line here. So they're still a bit too, not long enough, so they're too short. And here in the middle we need some more of them. The good thing is when you start very light, you can then choose the lines which look good, and then you can redraw them. When you start to draw very dark lash lines in the beginning, it is super easy to make mistakes, and then it looks very weird. So some lashes they're more like crisscrossing the other ones. And we have also lashes on the right side that go downways. You can start a lash from the bottom and then draw them to the end, but you can also start the other way around. So I think for the, maybe like here, just need more of them. And now I will continue with the bottom lashes. And then in the end I will make just some little details or just some additional changes with color pencils. But for now I will do the lashes with the little brush because it's more accurate this way. So when we see the lashes from the front, they kind of tilt sideways the more I get closer to the edge of the eye. And then here in the middle, some of them are still tilted side at the side, but some of them are very vertical lined, so that you see them from the front. And here in the middle of the eye, they slowly start to turn towards the left side of the eye and they change direction. They just are super difficult to paint because it is so easy to mess them up. Okay, I think this is okay. Some of these lashes, they go like the hair, the little hair starts a different layer. So some of them are more closer to the waterline, and some of the hair starts a little bit beneath it, and they are further away from the waterline, just a little bit, but sometimes the tiny differences can make it a larger difference. So it's also interesting to observe eyes from this close, because we never really notice all these little details. Okay, I will let that dry and continue with color pencils now. The first thing that I want to correct with the color pencil part is the border of the iris. I want to have a border that is not perfectly harsh, but also not totally smooth. So it's something in between. So I will first carefully just make a nice round shape, because the watercolor was not super round, so I will just correct this with the color pencil. Also the pupil, I can correct the shape a bit. And then I use a brown tone, and this one is burnt umber. And I want this little gradient here around the contour of the iris. Just a tiny gradient, just a little bit. And then I will use, this is raw umber, and with the raw umber I go along the outside of the black contour. Now we have this grain, which isn't so nice, so I will use this warm gray one. By the way, all of these are polychromos. And I just go along the contour here, over the raw umber, and this kind of eliminates the grain a bit. So this looks nice. Now for the inside, I will use a bit of the dark cadmium yellow. And I just add some spots here and there, just to make the eye color pop a bit. And I will also use this orange. This is dark cadmium orange, but I really only carefully touch the surface here. Okay, like that. And then I used this burnt ochre, and I also just go over the, well, carefully and very, with almost no pressure over the surface. Okay, then here for the inside, I want to make it more like an actual something that glows, like a piece of glass. So for this effect I use the luminance pencil. This is Prime Rose 242 color. This is yellowish white, and I just add some, like with circular movements, I just add some spots of this white in the iris. The luminance pencils are very opaque, all of them, so they also blend colors because they are wax-based, and they add a coat of wax on your drawing, which then blends the color pencil into each into each other, which is super helpful. However, the pupil is not, like the edge is a bit too sharp, so I use this burnt umber, which is a dark brown tone. I just draw a contour around the pupil here. This looks way better. Then I use a lighter brown tone, raw umber. It's just a lighter earthy brown tone. Then I just make the contour larger here, and then I use this primrose again, or primrose, I don't know how it's pronounced properly, and then again go over the contour. So to make these little gradients, the trick is just to layer color pencils on top of color pencils all the time. Then you get the gradients, the blendings, and everything looks smooth. Okay, I want to add some darker areas all around the eye. For these I use Caput Mortuum, which is a warm round tone. It's kind of like purpley brown. And I just look where we have some darker shadows and darker edges, and I just draw them so that they get a bit, so that the drawing just get a bit more contrast. Here I'm using black because here in the corner of the eye it's a bit darker, and I will read this gray here, which is cold gray number 4. I accidentally drew over the blush here. So we still need more orange. Like on the reference there's so much orange going on, and the watercolor totally faded, so I have the dark cadmium orange, and I will just add some spots of orange here. Also here along the eyebrows we have a lot of orange. I carefully apply the pigment on the surface of the paper. When the watercolor is dark, I can add a bit more pressure, but when it's very light, I also have to be light with a color pencil. Here in the inside, make it a bit more orange. And here in the corner of the eye, and in addition to the orange, I also will use a bit of pink. So let's find the right pink tone here. I think this one is nice. This is Dark Flesh from Polychromos. So in order to figure out which areas to choose, I just look on my reference photos, and I just on the reference photo and see where I can find more of these orange areas. I don't want everything to be the one orange tone. I want it to be a little bit alternating and changing, because then it looks more natural. And here, in fact, we have like 2 little wrinkles under the eye. So to go for perfect realism, we can add those. Of course, it's not necessary. here it needs to be a bit darker. This one is burnt sienna. It's kind of really dark burnt sienna though. So what I want to do now is to make the hair look a bit stronger. So first, it needs to be super sharp, the pencil. And I will redraw some of the eyebrows, just the strongest and the darkest one in the center of the eyebrow. I obviously don't want to add this black everywhere, because then it would again look very like strange, and if I would have just pasted it on it, top of it, so we don't want that. And I do the same with the lashes, so I just pick those lines of the lashes that seem to look good, like that seem to look convincing, and then I just follow them. With my pencil. I think this area here lacks some color, so I will add just some red here in the inside and a bit of orange. And also there's a tiny shadow. Okay, now it's broken. Like here in the beginning of the eyelid, just a tiny shadow. I will smooth out the border of the shadow with the ochre, burnt ochre. I think the burnt ochre is a nice color. I will just add some of them here and there. I think this area here needs to be darker. Maybe like that. Also the line of the eyelid needs to be a tad darker. Maybe not with black, but with this one. Maybe black. It's a bit difficult to get the right color here. I will also make the shadow here on the iris, on the top of the iris, a bit darker to give it even more three-dimensionality. Yeah, now I will make the waterline a bit darker, because it looks a bit too light for me. Kind of looks weird, so just use this warm gray number 1 and go over it. And then I will just draw some of the lashes here into this waterline. Yeah, just some of them, not all. And yeah, just some tiny shadows here. Okay, I will use this luminance white to correct here the shape of the eyeball. It got a bit wobbly when I added this line there. So I will just correct this one shape here with the white luminance. And then again, the pupil here. So in the end, you can just make those tiny adjustments until you're happy, basically. And sometimes for me it is the hardest part to determine when my drawing is finished, when my artwork is finished. So there's sometimes these tiny little things that bother me and that I want to have perfect for no specific reason. So I just add some of the burnt ochre here, make it a bit more lively. And I think, like in the corner here, the whole area needs to be a tiny bit darker, just a tiny bit. Then again, I want to have a gradient here, so I will use this. No, I think I might use the burnt ochre again. Just add a coat of pigment with those circular movements to get the most even layer possible. Maybe a bit orange. Maybe the white here is a bit too light. So this one is Venetian red, the same color that I have as watercolor, but it looks totally different. It claims to be the same pigment, but it definitely looks different. So I went with the color pencils over the lashes, so I have to paint over the lashes again here with a black color pencil. And then here too, I have to go over the shadow of the eyelid, this black line. Okay, I think it's good. I think it looks very convincing. Yeah, it might be like very detailed, and it's not really necessary. So this is just an idea for a realistic way of painting. You don't have to be with your own art that like super focused. Just some parts of the painting have to be a bit more detailed. Don't have to paint everything of your whole painting that detailed. If I would do that, I would probably need a month for finishing one painting. Yeah, but I hope nevertheless it was helpful for you and it could show you some new techniques, and I hope you enjoyed it. So I see you on the next one. Bye bye!